And I felt that if I could match those to the reo, then I would have a really interesting whakaaro and kaupapa for my show. So I gradually managed to bring the content of it back to this idea that I have here, which is a grid of 20 of those tohu. And I've put them together in a deliberate order that for me represents the principal sounds of the reo. So on the first line, you have I, O, E, A, U, and then on the second line, I, O, E, A, U. In other words, the extended vowel sound. And then I created one character for the sound ng, and one character for the sound f, and then the balance, the other 8, are the consonant sounds in the language. So conceptually what I'm saying is, wouldn't it be interesting if we began to explore the reo, which is until now only represented for us in the alphabet, a 26-character alphabet, which actually has nothing to do with the sounds of our language because it was created for other languages. How about if we begin to explore that as belonging to our reo alone? And if we put those 20 characters together in a grid and say, now we're going to compose the words in our language using these characters, we'll start to have a language that looks like it's altogether formed out of the visual gestures of the Maori language as well as the sound that we make when we speak it. Long explanation, but that's really how the exhibition came together.
Now, about the tohu, do they have a meaning, like in reference to like the land and the whakapapa and genealogy, like with the designs or some of the patterns or the symbols?
Well, I think it's really interesting to think about that. Actually, what I set out to do was to acknowledge the tupuna who signed the treaty. But I knew there were the 510 signatures on 8 documents, so I knew that I couldn't use all of those signatures. And some of those tohu are just like little crosses, you know, so from an artistic point of view, they're not that interesting. But from another point of view, the way these ones that I've selected have been formed, they're really beautiful graphic statements. And they're graphic statements that came out of the imagination of those tupuna who sat down and put their mark on that document. So part of what I wanted to bring more into sharper focus was that spontaneous artistic gesture that they made, and to understand something of the whakaaro, the sort of the mental process by which they brought those tohu to life. I mean, basically they just came and they sat down at a table with this big piece of paper, and they took up a pen, and they were probably not very used to working with pen and ink on paper, and then they just made these beautiful marks. And so, you know, in some ways they speak to me of some of the other gestures that we have in our culture, which we're more accustomed to. Ko whai whai, tukutuku, whakairo. You know, they've also been ways of representing the culture visually. So all of that, I think, is really interesting, because it then leads us into a consideration of the question you were asking, well, what was the whakapapa? You know, what do the marks represent? And unfortunately, we can't talk to those tupuna who signed the treaty at the time. We can only begin to guess what they had in mind when they signed the document, and I know for sure that some of them had their moko in mind. They understood the composition of the moko, and they used a fragment of that to represent them in their mark. But I think in many other cases they were just quite spontaneous gestures. Once they took up the pen, then came that little flourish. It's like, the fascination that I'm sure that you and I both had when we were children with our father's signatures. A number of times you watched them do that and thought, I'm going to have to get one of those for myself. It's the same thing, isn't it? The desire to make a mark is like, it's a really important part of our identity. And one of the first things that we have the desire to do once we understand what identity is to be able to make a mark that represents us. So that's what fascinated me, trying to bring those to life. And also, I felt that in their execution, these tohu are so beautiful that we need to see them in a different form. Paper is very two-dimensional, but what I've tried to do with this show is take them off the paper. And, look at the size of this. I mean, it's just a tiny little sort of microscopic view of what was being signed by the tupuna at that time. My idea was to expand them so we can interrogate them, so we can look at them in greater detail and really understand the flourish, what the hand was doing as it was moving on the paper, what the mind was thinking as it moved the hand. And all of those things, I think, are a really important part of our culture, because it's a very integrated culture in that sense. The integration of the hand and the heart and the mind and everything that we do has been a profound part of our legacy, and it's the thing that I cherish. It's why I'm an artist, because I really, when I'm at my best and when I'm feeling at my most comfortable, it's when I've got those three gifts working together.